Yeah, y'all, come on in. It's Jameson Haygood, and I am a watchman on the wall here in the state of Mississippi. I hope you're ready to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. For we've waited long enough, it's time to get after it. We're going to get straight into it today. I'm very thankful and grateful to be joined by George Antonos. He is the pastor at Hope Baptist Church in Montreal. He also has a YouTube channel that's called Counsel and Might, and he is here to give his perspectival knowledge on the situation tied to Israel, biblical Israel, and current geopolitical situations that we now find ourselves in. George, thank you so much for being a part of my show today.
Oh, thank you, Jameson. The honor is mine, especially to talk about the Bible and such a hot topic.
Yes, sir. Let's start. We're going to go with first of all, I would love for you to give a summary of kind of your past, where you came from, your family, how you ended up at Hope Baptist Church. And then we're going to get into starting with kind of Arab history, going back to kind of that World War I era that you've really been good with your YouTube channel laying out for the people. So let's start here with your own history, sir.
Sure. So yeah, my name is George Antonos. I'm from Lebanon, born and raised in Lebanon, the country. That's the Middle East, not a city in the States. I know you guys have cities called Lebanon in the States. It's a Greek family name. So on my father's side, we're a Greek Lebanese. On my mother's side, we are a Greek Palestinian originally. And that's because before the Arab invasions, people forget the Middle East spoke Greek because of Alexander the Great, but really spoke Aramaic. That was really our language until Arabic was forced upon us. So my parents knew the Lord Jesus Christ. They had been saved. And during the Lebanese Civil War, I was born in 1982, actually, when Israel came into Beirut, the only Arab capital that they ever besieged. And but they knew the Lord, and we went to evangelical churches. So I would hear the gospel in those churches. My father had fought for his Catholicism. In Lebanon, Catholics and Orthodox, they actually are militant because we're surrounded by a Muslim majority. Mm-hmm. And so I would hear the gospel in the evangelical churches. And then one day in December 1990, I got convicted of sin. I knew I was a sinner. I understood that Jesus Christ died for my sins and rose again. And I put my trust in him. And then to escape the war, we wanted an international passport. We applied to the United States. We applied to Canada. Canada accepted us. So we came here, and eventually, I felt the call of God to get into the ministry because I could not imagine something more important than the salvation of souls.
Amen.
And so, long story short, I got a bachelor's in public administration from the American University in Beirut, and I got my theology doctorate from Great Plains Baptist Divinity School in South Dakota. And I got to pastor amongst the Arabs also at one point, to preach amongst the Arabs. It was hard for them, even the Christians, to accept what the Bible has to say about Israel. So the Lord led me out to start Hope Baptist Church in Montreal. We're actually in a religious Jewish neighborhood, and that was almost 8 years ago. And that's basically the long and short of it.
How did the YouTube channel come about?
That's a good question. I saw that this was becoming more and more a place where people go. It was a bit like TV at first. Christians, we didn't want to touch the TV, but then there was so much bad on TV that we kind of realized that's a field on which we must be. And social media was similar. I was worried, to be honest, I was worried about being behind the camera. I think it's a great way for the flesh to get proud and puffed up and get out of focus. So I waited on that. But I was a youth pastor at an Arabic Baptist church in Quebec. And one day I asked the young people, I said, look, this is an anonymous survey. I just want to know, why is it that you think you're saved and if you have assurance? And don't give me the answer that you think I want to hear.
Yeah.
I want a completely honest answer from you. Write it on a piece of paper. Don't even put the names. I'm not telling anybody what you write. I just want to know how to pray for you and where you are spiritually. And to my shock, 20% of the young people wrote on the piece of paper that they had gotten their doctrine assurance of salvation off of YouTube.
Wow.
And these are like church-going young people, right? So in my mind, young people only go on YouTube to watch foolish stuff. Then I realized, wow, those kids are going on YouTube to get doctrine. Mm-hmm. And that was really the catalyst for me to I need to get on there and counter some of those heresies and reach the people who are going to social media to get their doctrine, whether we like it or not.
Before I set you up to turn you loose with just laying out this whole Israeli-Arab conflict, where the Bible fits in, and how you are analyzing current geopolitical events around us in light of prophecy, I want to at least be clear where you and I are both coming from. We're coming from a straightforward Bible believers position, dispensational division of the word, and also a premillennial view of the scriptures. Now, that's not because I told you, George, before we went live, here on this show, we analyze current politics and we engage with the culture through a biblical worldview, also knowing we all have different ideas of prophecy and different ideas of where we sit on the eschatological timeline and things like that, but we still come together for defending individual liberty, constitutional rights, and these precepts that are found in the Word of God. But I wanted to just be clear, and so we have I have a lot of friends that, they don't even believe in a rapture. I have a lot of friends that are post-millennial types and all this, but I believe today what I wanted to get is a clear picture of how you see the world through this biblical lens and current events. And then that way we can all compare and contrast and at least understand why some people would be claiming things that are prophetical about the state of Israel, the capital S state of Israel right now, and maybe help people make a little more sense out of what's going on. So with that being said, even though I didn't even do that as well as you would have, let's start right there. Give me this Arab history of how these nations kind of came about. You can start wherever you want to, and lay out this initial conflict geopolitically and biblically, if you will.
Sure. So just to give the listeners a bit of a background, and I appreciate you being transparent about your angle and being open to listening to everybody and communicating to everybody. My grandparents are 1948, quote-unquote Palestinians on my mom's side.
Wow.
So incredible. My grandmother was born in Bethlehem in 1924-25. My maternal grandfather, was born in Haifa in northern Israel, to affluent family. And so my grandparents had to flee during the 1948 Israeli War of Independence. And the people who told my grandparents to flee were the Arab leaders. Mm-hmm. And I asked my grandmother this point blank because I had read it a few places. It surprised me. She's with the Lord now. But I asked her, and she said, yes, that's true. They basically told my grandparents, we're going to drive the Jews into the sea, and you'll come back, reclaim your land and theirs, so you'll have even more. And so my grandparents got on a boat, landed in Beirut. The Arabs lost the war, and that's how they became quote-unquote refugees. So the reason I mention this is just so people understand that I'm trying my best to believe the Bible as it stands, even when my flesh doesn't like it. So sure. I come from the Middle East, and we are raised generally, not in my family, but our culture raises us to hate the Jews and to hate Israel. If we become Christians, it's usually from an amillennial kind of understanding of the Bible where the church has replaced Israel. So I'm part of the people that would have a reason to hate the people, but I've had to just believe the book as it is and die to my own self and find my identity in Jesus Christ.
And George,
so that's just like a little disclaimer.
Yes, sir. And George, would you define, I don't want to get off on this, but would you define dispensationalism or a dispensationalist? Because I know I've been attacked. I understand also what our Kevin Thompson talks about with saying not wanting to align with a set of fixed beliefs because it allows you to be painted into a corner, and I agree with that. But also in order to scale it down and actually have these conversations, we kind of have to say kind of where we're coming from. Would you define dispensationalism as the Bible is saying what it's saying in context, and it is literal unless it says it's not literal?
Yeah, that's basically it. It's
okay.
Simply methodology of it. What I tell people, what I teach in the discipleship course, for example, I don't even tell them, look, we're going to look at this dispensation. All I do is you just go through the Bible and you note the things that God has commanded man to do to fulfill his duty towards God, and note the changes in that.
Right,
and that's all it is.
That's a great, even simpler form. So it's very clear, George, to me, that at different times throughout written history, throughout God's interaction with man, that he has dealt with man and he has prescribed man to do different things and different people groups to do different things. And that's what we're talking about. So in other words, you know, when I open up to Genesis chapter number 6, and I know this is a kind of a funny example that many people use, God is not telling me to go build a big boat out of gopher wood. Would it be a great, simple example, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
And then one more follow-up question too, George, as we get rolling.
Sure.
So your grandparents were Christians in 1940. Were they Christians at that time and as they fled Palestine?
So my maternal grandfather was Orthodox. He wasn't saved, but they were Orthodox, the Greek. Originally, our family was Spiridou, is a Greek from Rhodes, the island of Rhodes, that came and had vineyards in northern Israel. And my grandmother is a Syriac, not Syrian, but a Syriac ethnicity. It's almost dying. And they fled the Turkish genocide in southeastern Turkey. Wow. They fled down to the land of Israel down there. And that's why she was born there, because her parents had fled down there. So that's like the background. And
yes, sir.
So the people who are in the land of what people think of as Palestine, who are ethnically, there's no such thing as a Palestinian. Palestinian is a political identity. Ethnically, there are Greeks, there are Circassians, there are Georgians, there are Egyptians, there are Syrians. That's who those people are down there.
Okay, great. Well, we got 5 minutes or so here in this first segment. Go ahead and get started with that history. Okay,
so very quickly, to give you a historical breakdown, most Bible readers, as your audience is, they're familiar with the Philistines, and sometimes people make the connection between Palestinians and Philistines. The Philistines in the Bible, ethnically, Genesis chapter 10, you got the table of nations. They come from Mizraim, who begets Casluhim, out of whom came Philistine, Moses tells us, which means that the Philistines of the Bible are ethnically Egyptian.
Okay.
And the last time you read about them is when Nebuchadnezzar comes into the land and he judges Israel. He takes over the entire Levant, which is the Mediterranean coast, and he wipes out those nations, including Moab, Ammon, Edom, and you never really hear again of the Philistines. There's a whisper of them in Nehemiah, but as a nation, you don't read about them again in the Bible. And that's about like 550 BC. I'm simplifying here, ballpark.
Yes, sir.
Now, your readers, they read your Bible. The next thing is you get into the Gospels, and you read where the angel of the Lord commands Joseph to return Mary and Jesus into the land of Israel. And we read that twice.
Wow.
So the Bible in the times of the Roman Empire is calling it the land of Israel, A. B, you read in the Gospels that the land is called the province of Judea.
Yes,
the
sir.
Romans called it Judea, not Philistia, because it was inhabited by Jews. What happens was, in the 2nd century, most of the people are familiar that there was a rebellion of the Jews from 66 to 70 AD, which the Romans crushed.
Yes, sir.
But there was a second rebellion in the 2nd century, the Bar Kokhba revolt, under the Emperor Hadrian. And he was so incensed with that second rebellion that he basically built a temple of Jupiter on top of where the Solomon's temple used to be. He forbade the Jews from entering Jerusalem. He changed its name to Aelina Capitolina. And then on top of that, he said, we're going to call this region Philistia. Mm-hmm. And he did that to spite the Jews. So what Hadrian did is he reached back 600 years in time to the time of Nebuchadnezzar, pulled out the name of their ancient enemies, and to spite them called Philistia. It's almost like France taking over the United States and then calling Mississippi, calling it Paris, or something like that, or Nice. That's where how the term Palestinian starts coming back on the scene 600 years after the extinction of the Philistines as a nation state.
Okay.
So far, so good?
Yes, sir. That's great. Yes, sir. And that first ransacking of the temple would be that in that 67 to 70 AD, that was done by Titus, right? Where
Correct.
where Herod's temple was destroyed there and no stone was left unturned, just like Jesus said. Prophesied would happen. Okay. Yes, sir. We're tracking with that. We're tracking.
Okay. So there's a second rebellion in the 2nd century, and that's where the Romans, this is an important point, they reach back 600, 700 years back in time, and they change from Judea, which means Jew in Latin, to Philistia. despite the Jews for their rebellion. All right. Now, after that, you've got the Roman Empire splits. You've got the eastern half of the Roman Empire. But the big event here is that from 614 to 629 AD, you've got the Zoroastrian Sassanid Persians who take over Jerusalem from the Roman Byzantine rule. They take over for 15 years. But then a man called Muhammad comes out of the Arabian Peninsula. Well, he doesn't come out, but the Muslims come out. Mm-hmm. So he unites Arabia under the religion of Islam. And in the day of Muhammad, there are three power blocks. So once Muhammad dies, Arabia is united as a power block, the Rashidun Caliphate, or empire. You can think of it as an empire. In the east, you have the Sasanian Empire. They're Persian. And the Levant, modern-day Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Egypt, Turkey, Greece, that's the Byzantine Empire. The Arabs, this is important to understand, the Arabs are in the Arabian Peninsula, which is modern-day Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, etc.
Okay.
The Arabs come out in the name of Islam and conquer the Byzantine Empire from 639 to about 1099. They take over land that is not theirs. They take over Greek-speaking people, Aramaic-speaking people. They force them to Islamicize and to adopt Arabic as their language. And they're going to take over basically from like Iran, Persia to Egypt, everything in there. So I like to remind people that when the Arabs talk about land being taken from them, the Arabs came out of the Arabian Peninsula and took over today everything from Afghanistan to the Maghreb, to like Morocco. Wow. Millions of square kilometers that are not theirs. My people are forgotten. Like the Phoenicians have disappeared. The Assyrian Christians, the Chaldean Christians, the Syriacs. Nobody talks about them. We can't even speak our own language anymore. We were the ones who were genocided because of that Arab takeover.
Okay, that's a good stopping point.
I'm sorry?
No. Finish what you were going to say. That's a good stopping point here in this first segment to move forward from.
Yeah. So just to highlight the hypocrisy of, and I'm part Arab. I love the Arabic people, but we're talking, as you said, this is a show. We're talking about geopolitics and biblical view of things. As far as on the national level, for a nation, for an ethnicity of people to claim that their land is being taken when they themselves came out of the Arabian Peninsula and took over everything from Afghanistan to Western Africa is almost unbearable hypocrisy.
We have George Antonos here with us for the whole 2 hours, Lord willing. He is the pastor at Hope Baptist Church in Montreal. His YouTube channel is Counsel and Might, and I'm just telling you, regardless of what theological position you come from, you should check this guy's videos and biblical teaching out and interact with it. I guarantee you'll be sharper. I'm so thankful to be joined with him. We continue analyzing where the geopolitical current day events mesh with biblical prophecy with George Antonos when we get back. It's not revenge we're after, it's the reckoning, and you can bet the reckoning is on its way when you're in a good fight with Jameson Haygood right here on 103.9 WYAB. We're visiting with George Antonos. He is the pastor at Hope Baptist Church in Montreal, YouTube channel called Counsel and Might. George, you had walked the history, the Arab-Israeli history, all the way up to Muhammad's death and the crusade from the Muslim sector further into Europe. That's where we pick up right now. Yes.
So something to note here, when the Arabs get to the Levant, by Levant I mean the Mediterranean Sea coast, which is modern-day Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. When they get there, they are shown the Temple Mount, and it's just rubble. They're called Jerusalem by the name of Elia, which is a short for Capitolina Iolina, which is Aelia Capitolina, which is the name that Hadrian had given Jerusalem, the Latin name. So when the Arabs come to Jerusalem, they have no name for Jerusalem. They don't know what to call it. They simply they abbreviate the Latin name from Aelia Capitolina to Elia. That is very important to note. Now, in the Quran, I read Arabic as my native tongue, and I read the Quran in Arabic. Jerusalem is never mentioned once by name in the Quran. Not once. Contrast that with the Bible that mentions the name Jerusalem in its different forms over 900 times, between 900, I think by the last count I counted 1,099 times, something like that. They don't know what to call it. Jerusalem is not a holy site to Islam, theologically. That's a later development, fabrication of Muslim theology that some Muslims are now finally calling out. So I just want to point that out. I want to point out also that in the Quran, which again I read in Arabic, the Quran never mentions Palestinians, though it speaks of Jews, because there was no such thing as Palestinian in the day of Muhammad.
Interesting.
The Quran mentions that God led Moses to lead the Jewish people into the promised land of Canaan. So the Quran says that the land belongs to the Jews, which means that any Muslim that is fighting to expel the Jews from that land is actually fighting against his own book and against his own God. And you see where politics comes between them and their God, they'll choose the politics. Those are things that you'll never hear on mainstream media.
No,
and that's why I'm very thankful to get the chance to say them on your show.
I've never heard that analysis to this point, and that triggered my memory on some of your previous videos. Can you go through right now? Would be a good time to lay out the idea of this furthest mosque. Can you go further into this idea that it's Jerusalem is somehow holy to the Muslim? Can you expound on that?
Yes. So for that, I have to give you a little bit of Quran study, I guess. There's one orphan verse in the Quran that says that, I think it's in Surah number 11, if I'm not mistaken, verse 1. It says that God led his servant to the furthest mosque, from the holy mosque to the furthest mosque. Now, that's what the Arabic says. Mm-hmm. From the holy mosque to the furthest mosque. That's it. Now, historically, in the day of Muhammad, forgive me, I got a cough here. In the day of Muhammad, the furthest mosque, since Muhammad never left Arabia except in Ethiopia at one point, but there was very little mosques. Islam is a nascent religion at this point. So the holy mosque would be in Mecca, where the heathen Arabs were worshiping their gods, and that was the power center of Muhammad's tribe, the tribe of Quraysh. The furthest mosque in that was some kind of prayer house a few kilometers north of Mecca. This is what I'm saying, by the way. All Muslim scholars agree on that. The Quran, that's all it says. As I mentioned, it never says Jerusalem by name.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So everybody in Muhammad's generation and like 70 years later understands it that way in its historical context. What happens was the Muslim empire expands extremely quickly, and now it hits the Mediterranean coast, going northwest. So you've got a kingdom that expanded so fast that you have Mecca, which is supposed to be its political center, ruling very distant lands very quickly. It's very hard to maintain control over all that. So there are Muslim rulers who are in the Levant on the Mediterranean seacoast. They realize that the religious legitimacy of their religion is based in Mecca. So they've got people looking to whoever is ruling back in Mecca as the main guy. So the guys who are ruling out west, they need to imbue their own territory under their direct command with a sense of religious significance so as to bolster their legitimacy, that you don't have to look to Mecca. We've got something holy here. Mm-hmm. And for the Bible readers among you, that sounds very much like what Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, did when God split the kingdom after Solomon's death between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. God gave him the 10 northern tribes. And if you remember Jeroboam's reasons, he says, well, yeah, God gave me the northern kingdom, but those Jews have to go down to Jerusalem 3 times a year to worship. And if they do that, they're going to go back to Rehoboam and I'm going to lose the kingdom. So Jeroboam invents his own religious holiday, and he sets up 2 golden calves in Bethel and Dan. He says, don't go to Jerusalem to worship. Dan and Bethel are holy cities. You can worship here. Mm-hmm. And that is exactly what those rulers did. They basically said this. It was an anachronistic exegesis of the Quran. They said, you know that verse where it says that God took Muhammad to the furthest mosque? And so they build a mosque in the area of Jerusalem, and they say, look, this is the furthest mosque. This is the furthest point, basically, of the Muslim empire. That's what the Quran was talking about. And so it was an anachronistic kind of a device because in Muhammad's day, there was no Jerusalem. But now that they ruled it, they reinterpreted the furthest mosque away from Mecca to Jerusalem. And that's how the Muslims were sold a bill of goods, by making them believe that Jerusalem was somehow holy when it wasn't.
And this is the second part of analysis that you give early, that you had given previously, that I had never heard also. So basically, to simplify what you just laid out, they're not reading the Quran in context there when they talk about the furthest mosque. They have revised their history, and now the furthest mosque makes Jerusalem their new holy place.
Correct. So to put it in American terms, as a actually Canadian friend helped me do, he said it's almost like, you guys, I think, had those two explorers that went out west. They passed the Mississippi River or something like that. I forget their name.
Lewis and Clark, yeah.
Lewis and Clark, right. It's almost like, it's like saying, imagine there's a verse in the Bible that says the furthest church. Uh-huh. And at that point, it's like Rhode Island, United States. And somebody 200 years later, after Lewis and Clark reached the western coast of California, they reinterpret the furthest church as being someplace in California. You're completely out of your historical context. It's utterly anachronistic. And that's what they did. And by the way, what I'm saying, the Muslims know this.
Yeah.
And a very interesting turn of events has happened recently, which is because the Sunni nation, so Islam is divided into Sunni and Shia. They are warring. It's a question of who's the successor of Muhammad. It's a civil war, really. Because the Sunnis are so afraid of Iran, and Iran is Shia, they have now cozied up with the state of Israel. Now, the way they have to justify their alliance with Israel to their people, after having touted Israel as the big enemy for so long, the way they were okay with Trump moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, they were now forced to actually come out and say the truth. And now they have to tell their people, because their people are saying, like, how can you give up Jerusalem? And now the Muslims, scholars finally have to say, well, actually, we lied to you, although they're not saying it that way. Jerusalem is not holy in Islamic theology. Mecca and Medina are. And the Quran just says the furthest mosque, and historically that was in Arabia. It could not have been in Jerusalem. So no, Jerusalem is not holy to us. So you have Muslim scholars finally coming out and saying it.
Understanding this history is giving me such more of a clear perspective on how to decipher what's true, what's false, and maybe how to think about these things going forward. We have George Antonos here for the rest of the 2 hours, Lord willing. He's the pastor at Hope Baptist Church in Montreal. So we will take the break right here. We'll pick up right there when we come back, because, George, I don't want to get off on this too far, but also, see, that's what's so interesting about the timing of this conflict, or what's quickly headed to full-on kinetic war, is, see, the Saudis, and in particular Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince over there, was wanting to westernize. They were working on some peace deals with Israel, but these powers that be above nation states, and we can argue who that is and why and the different players, they couldn't let that continue, that peace in the Middle East, even that Trump fostered, continue. So there's an element going on right now that this kind of busted up. This kind of broke up that Saudi and some other Egyptian leaders, and even Jordan, that were making peace with Israel. You tracking what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what this did. This another reason behind this, and why Satan even ultimately would not want this to happen. I mean, there were a lot of, Mohammed bin Salman was working in Saudi Arabia. These types were starting to kind of figure out, hey, how can we get along economically and things like that. And now this conflict is basically put all that on hold. Or torpedoed it. You're exactly right. George, we're going to continue with you when we get back. Guys, you got time to send out the links right now. WYAB.com and click listen. You can stream this show from anywhere on the planet. Here we go. We are destroying cultural Marxist arguments, a lot like what happens when a snake gets caught in a lawnmower. We're doing it here weekdays, 10 a.m. to noon, in a good fight with Jameson Haygood. Stream it live from anywhere on the planet, WYAB.com. Today we're visiting with George Antonos, his YouTube channel, Counsel and Might. He's the pastor at Hope Baptist Church in Montreal. George, you had brought us up with two of the just very unique and historically accurate analysis of what's going on with the fight over the land there in Jerusalem as it pertains to some of the leverage that the Islamic religion is putting on us by saying that the furthest mosque, for instance, would be in Jerusalem when the Quran was written. There was no mosque in Jerusalem, things like that. Pick up right there, would you?
Sure. So we've noted that when they come in, they don't even have a name for Jerusalem. They call it by its Latin name. That's also why the Arabs began to call the region Palestine, which is Palestine. They not only adopted the Latin name of Jerusalem, which they had no name for, they also adopted the Latin name for the region that the Romans had given it, Palestina.
Okay.
But if you recall, we discussed this, why had the Romans called it Palestina when they earlier had called it Judea? Because they recognized the Jewish population. It's because they reached back 600 years before time in the days of Hadrian, and to spite the Jews, changed the name of the land to their historical enemies' names that had been extinct, just to shame them because of their rebellion in the 2nd century. So that's how the term Palestine gets revived. It's an anachronistic term even in the days of the Roman Empire. Very important to note. So the Arabs come in, okay, what do the Romans call this place? Palestina. All right, so they Arabize the name, of course, and it becomes Palestine. That's where the Crusades come in. 1099, 1291, okay. The Crusades of the Latin Kingdom. And something I want to say about the Crusades, because I know, and we all know, that the Roman Church committed atrocities in the name, of Christ, and that they burnt Bibles and they persecuted born-again Christians and Jews. But when it comes to the geopolitical justification of the Crusades, when it comes to what is known in Latin as the casus belli, the cause of war, the Roman Empire, the Crusades were justified. And that is something we've forgotten, because the Muslims shame us about the Crusades, and that is not a place where they can shame anybody. I gave all that history to explain that the Roman had held the land of what is now known as the Middle East. They had controlled basically the Middle East and the land of Israel ever since Pompey in 63 BC. So when the Arabs show up, the Romans have been in controlling the area for 700 years. And the Arabs take it by force coming out of the Arabian Peninsula. So it's only normal that Europe would try to recover a land that it had controlled for 700 years, especially when that land is holy to Christians and not holy to Muslims. The Muslims would do the same thing if the United States were to come in. If the United States were to come in today and try to take the Middle East, the Arabs would say, "Hey, that's our land," even though originally it's not theirs. They came out of Arabia. But they would say, "We've been here for hundreds of years. You're not going to take it." And if America takes the Middle East, Arab nations would unite and would attack America to reclaim the Middle East. That's exactly what the Crusades were. They were attacking the Arabs for having taken Roman land. So the Crusades were absolutely justified as far as their casus belli, their cause of war. Another item that's very important to remind people of when discussing this issue.
Yeah, and it's actually ironic that you gave that analogy there of the Middle East and the Arabs fighting back for that, because really, in many ways, we see Western intelligence, British intelligence, and the CIA interfering in modern times with a lot of national things going on amongst Muslim nations, and that has caused some righteous anger from those Muslims. And now, look in hindsight 2020, we won't get off on that, but your analogy rings very true there. That's been some of the problems, is British and American intelligence and secret armies types involving themselves in overthrowing legitimate governments of Muslim nations.
Yeah, so just a reminder that those lands belonged to Rome before they belonged to the Arabs.
Yes, sir.
By the way, again, because I know your audience is biblically literate, that very same argument is what Jephthah answers the king of the Ammonites, who basically reproved Israel. He says, "Hey, you took my land." And one of Jephthah's answers is, "For 300 years Israel has had it, and you've said nothing. And by the way, wilt thou not possess that which Chemosh thy God giveth thee to possess?" So Jephthah tells the king of the Ammonites, "Hey, even if it was through military conflict that we took it, wouldn't you possess that which your God gives you through war?" Which is exactly what the Arabs have done from Afghanistan to Morocco. They claim that God gave them that by military conflict. So then, if you're going to be consistent as a Muslim in saying God gave me that land because I won it by military conquest, then you must also accept that if the West overtakes you and takes your quote-unquote land, then God gave them that land by military conquest.
It is a fair point.
It's just, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, as you Americans say, right?
That's right. Sure. couple more minutes in
so
this
quickly
segment.
Now,
yeah.
Okay, so we'll come up to World War I very quickly. After the Salah ad-Din takes over Richard Lionheart, the Muslims recover from the Latin Kingdom the area and Jerusalem. Then you have a slave case called the Mamluks who are going to take over the area. They are not Arabs, and they don't call the land Palestine anymore. They start calling it Syria. So does the Ottoman Empire, which are Turks, not Arabs. And the Turks are going to control the area from 1517 to 1917, 400 years. And they don't call it Palestine. They call it Syria.
Okay, so
that
the
is very
Turks,
important to remember.
Excellent stuff. The Turks were in control. The Ottoman Turks were in control of Jerusalem, let's say, for how long?
400 years. Okay. And before them, the Mamluks for about 100 to 200. And they all count Jerusalem as part of Syria.
And the whole time, it's pretty much called Jerusalem. I know the area is called something different, but maybe they call that city Jerusalem.
So the area is called Syria, but they wouldn't call it Jerusalem. They would call it like the Arabs would call it Al-Quds, which means the holy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's try to stay on. I'll stay on time. I really appreciate you breaking it up like this. I know it's not easy for you. You're used to straightforward podcast content, and by the way, with your knowledge, it should be set up that way. But we love live radio here, and you're a good fit for it here too. We're going to take the break here to stay on time. We'll come back with one more short segment, and then I told you George is going to go real quick. We'll already be in our second hour. We got George Antonos here with us, and I'm just so grateful to get this type of perspective, historical perspective, mixed with the biblical worldview to try to figure out maybe new ways to think about this conflict. Stay with us. It's the radio show for those citizens out there who are awake, not woke. It's a good fight with Jameson Haygood right here on 103.9 WYAB. We got George Antonio's final segment here, the first hour. Whole another hour to go, about 2 minutes here. I want to give you some time to just push all the ways that we can reach out to you, George, and stay in touch with you, the YouTube channel and things like that. So we've walked our way up with this Middle Eastern, Arab, land of Israel history timeline, pretty much now to the Ottoman Turks and World War I, where we're going to pick it up here in the second hour. And then we're really going to start analyzing the modern day conflict and how to think about biblical Israel versus the uppercase S state of Israel, things like that, how to look at it in light of prophecy. And maybe even if you don't hold to the prophetic worldview we do, then at least you could understand where some of your friends are coming from as we start to really think through the spiritual war that this is and the religious aspect of this, which is playing into this to make it the most confusing geopolitical event that I've ever tried to analyze on radio. 1 minute left here, George. How can we reach out with you to you? How can we stay in touch with you?
Sure. There's the Hope Baptist Church of Montreal page on Facebook. There's the Counsel and Might page on Facebook, also a group. Counsel written S-E-L, not C-I-L, as in the spirit of counsel and might.
Yes, sir.
On YouTube, it's Counsel Might. If you don't find it like that, you can type in Dr. George Antonios, Georgeantonios. You can contact me through Facebook like that. And I also teach, there's the Counsel and Might Seminary, which is an online seminary. It's a 3-year program that I teach through Zoom. We've got students from all over the world if people are interested. I'm not seeking to be accredited. It's not accredited, but I've got a PhD in theology, and I believe the book. And we cover a broad range of topics so people are equipped to understand their Bible, how to understand their Bible, and to serve the Lord. So that's the Counsel and Might Seminary, if anybody's interested in that.
George, your servant leadership, I've gotten to talk to you a few times on the phone privately. I've studied a lot of your stuff online. Your servant leadership speaks for itself. Second hour is next. Yeah, you found the right place. It's Jameson Haygood, and I am a watchman on the wall here in the state of Mississippi. I hope you're ready to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The second hour here in A Good Fight with George Antonios. He is the pastor at Hope Baptist Church in Montreal. He also has a YouTube channel up called Counsel and Might. We've walked through the history of Israel and the Middle East leading up to World War I and the Ottoman Turks. George, would you like to pick up right there?
Yeah. So here we're at World War I. The British have taken over that part of the world that the Ottoman Empire controlled. And so from the beginning of history, basically, to this day, Israel, Judah or Judea, has been the only united, independent, sovereign nation state that ever existed west of the Jordan River. As I mentioned, the Ottomans have called the region Syria. And it's in that context that we have the famous Balfour Declaration. Actually, we're not even sure who wrote it. Balfour is the most common name associated with it because it's signed with him, but the person who wrote up, there's debate over who actually wrote it.
Yeah.
So that's when we get to the Balfour Declaration.
Hey, George. George.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but there's something that you've analyzed well that we've started on this program as well. Can you analyze a little bit of the coalition and how the Hashemites and Muslim Brotherhood was brought about and how they were used by British intelligence in order to win certain aspects of World War I, how the Arabs were used, Lawrence of Arabia. Can you hit that for us too? Because that's a real key.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent direction there. So something to keep in mind, the Ottoman Empire is Muslim, yes, but they're Turks. They're the ones basically the Turks were the military experts of the Arab Muslim world. They use the Turks as their special military. Even the French to this day have an expression that says "strong like a Turk."
Okay.
Now they basically toppled their masters and then they ruled. So the Arabs were aggrieved at the fact that they were servants to their own servants now, to the Turks. And one of the things that the British Empire promised the Arabs is, if you help us against the sick man of Europe, as Churchill described the Ottoman Empire, if you help us overthrow it, then we will grant you your own sovereign kingdoms.
Okay.
And you won't be under the Ottomans anymore. That was the promise. Now, of course, knowing the British, bless their hearts, as you guys say in the South, they were making promises to everybody, right, left, right, and center. And they double-crossed a whole bunch of people. That's how war is. But that's why the Arabs fought against the Ottomans on the side of the Brits. And the Brits also are making promises to the Jews that if we win this war, we'll have a place to live in the Middle East. So now you have conflicting promises right after they have won the First World War. And this is what the British have to navigate in creating this buffer zone in the Middle East.
Hey, I don't want to run this into the ground, but can you go into a little bit of the different groups and how the Muslim Brotherhood came out of this British intelligence use of Arabs to fight off the Ottoman Turks? There was a split there. Weren't they using Lawrence of Arabia in one way and then the Hashemites in another way?
Yeah. So it's like the Muslim Brotherhood, the modern political group comes a bit later on as an entity on the scene. But you're right. All these things kind of go back to that era. That's the beginning of things. Yes.
Okay.
The Arabs were finding their identity at this point. All right. So to explain, since we're going to go into it a little bit, in Arabia, you have the heartbeat of Islam, which is the city of Mecca. And those are the place where you see people on TV, millions of people that will circumambulate the what is a black structure. It's covered in black satin, actually.
Yes, sir.
Right. So this is their kind of holy land. Now,
and that's in modern day Saudi Arabia? I'm sorry, that's in modern day Saudi Arabia?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The city of Mecca in modern day Saudi Arabia. All right.
Okay.
So the family that was in charge of that were the Hashemite family, and that section of Arabia was not known at that point as Saudi yet. Saudi is just the name of a tribe. Okay. So when we say Saudi Arabia, it's the name of a tribe because that tribe now, the Saudis, rule Arabia. But Western Arabia, on the eastern coast of the Red Sea, that was ruled by the Hashemite family, which says that they are descendants of their prophet Muhammad. And that area was known as the Hijaz. Now, the Saudi tribe attacks the Hashemites, drives them out of the Hijaz, and now it's the Saudis who are in possession of Mecca. And the Hashemites basically tell the British, hey, we told the Arab peoples to fight against the Ottoman Empire so you can give us our own nation state and sovereignty, and the Saudi tribe is kicking us out of here. So as a compensation prize, Winston Churchill, that's how Winston Churchill creates the modern state of Transjordan and gives it to the descendants of the Hashemite family. So the Middle East, the way it's cut up by the Sykes-Picot Accord of after World War I,
yes, sir,
it was cut up in a bizarre way, crossing over ethnic and religious lines to accommodate this deal and that deal. It's an illogical division of the land, and part of the reason why you have so much problems in the Middle East, because those are fabricated, artificial states that ignore political and ethnic nuances on the geographical field.
So it was basically what we've said. It was there were Western elites, we could say British intelligence and even tied to central banking, Western central banking elites redrawing maps not in accordance with legitimate culture kind of caused the extra problems, inorganic problems.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I'm tracking. Great stuff. Yes, sir. Continue.
Correct. Now, so the British take over, all right, and they're going to call it the Balfour Declaration.
Yes, sir.
Which in 1917, which reads, I'll just read it for the readers. It's addressed to Lord Rothschild, and it says, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine, the wording is very important, the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, like my grandparents and older, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country.
Okay.
Yes,
so that you're basically continue because what you're going to get to, I believe, and we're going to have the rest of this hour to get where we really need to, and that even if we're not dealing with the most current up-to-date things out of Israel, getting this in perspective is going to be key, which is why I can't thank you enough for coming on. You're getting to the fact, absolutely. You say the wording here is key because of what? Because it's clearly was not adhered to even. It was set up to acknowledge a biblical Israel and have a place for a biblical people, but there were more conflicts caused by the fact that it wasn't exactly adhered to. What are you saying? Yes,
and that the wording was vague enough to allow some leeway.
Okay.
So it's not that we're going to establish. You're establishing inside of Palestine a national home for the Jewish people.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's somewhere. Now, some of the question that can be raised is, okay, why do the British call it Palestine if that's Israel? That's one of the questions that is asked.
Sure.
And now I'm going to ask the audience to really rewire their brains. This is going to be like Twilight Zone stuff. It's really, you're going to rewire connotations in your brain. That's what I'm going to ask you to do. The objection of the Arabs at that point was not, the objection of the Arabs was, why did you call it Palestine and not Syria? The Arabs hated, abominated, and utterly abhorred the name Palestine.
Okay. Wow.
That's hard for people to understand now.
Right.
Because there's been a change in nomenclature. I mean, it's almost like you guys, if I can relate to something you guys can relate to, like the Democrat and the Republican Party kind of switched, so a lot of people think of Abraham Lincoln as, I think, if I'm not mistaken, as a Democrat, but he was a Republican. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, there's
history, but
there's some back and forth on like, did the ideas switch but yeah, I'm tracking with that understanding that people think similar, that, right? It's even around here. One of the things even around here would be, I don't know, we love the idea in the Southeast of calling this Dixie, but yet now that's considered racist, and you want to enslave people for calling the southeastern part of the United States Dixie. That could be a similar.
Okay.
But we're tracking with what you're saying.
Okay. So the Arab contention was, you guys invented the term Palestine so you can justify bringing in the Jews. So the Arabs, when they saw Palestine in the Balfour Declaration, they're not happy about this.
Okay.
They're saying Palestine is a Zionist term because the Balfour Declaration uses that term to justify bringing in the Jews into Palestine.
Okay.
So I would ask the readers to think about that. it seems controversial in our modern understanding of what a Palestinian is to say the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. But at the time, the Brits chose Palestine precisely because it was a neutral term. Syria was the non-neutral term because Syria was the name that was given by the Ottoman Empire to the region. So you'd have had a hard time justifying having Jews in Syria, but you would have had an easier time justifying having Jews in Palestine.
Okay.
That is what is called the Nakba. You may sometimes hear that term. Actually, it's possibly a distant relative of mine called George Antonios from my hometown, Deir al-Omar in Lebanon, who went down to Palestine. He wrote the book on the Arab Awakening called The Arab Awakening on Arab Nationalism by George Antonios. It's still a book that's taught in universities and schools today.
Wow.
And he basically says, this is not Palestine. This is Syria. You need to stop saying this is Palestine.
Okay.
This has always been Syria, and there was never such a thing as Palestine. And the catastrophe in the Arab mind pre-1948 was not the creation of the state of Israel. It was the creation of the Palestine Mandate. They hated the term Palestine. Arabs said Palestine is a Jewish Zionist term. This is Syria. It's later on that for reasons of optics, they rebranded themselves as Palestinians.
Okay.
But pre-1948, Palestine, so basically here's what you need to understand, the hearers to understand, that the word Palestine evoked the same feelings in the Arabs at the turn of the 20th century as the term Israel today does.
Okay, right. All right, that's new. Yeah, that's new to me. I hadn't heard that.
Absolutely, because they're telling them, this is not Palestine, this is Syria.
Right.
And that homeland, the area of the British Mandate for Palestine, was basically from the Mediterranean Sea coast and encompassing the modern day state of Jordan, so way east of the Jordan River.
Wow, okay.
Way east of the Jordan River. The Jews could live in all that, west and east of the Jordan River. But because, as I mentioned, the Hashemites were telling the British Empire, hey, like you promised us a piece of land over here. So Churchill would boast in his latter years that he created the British Protectorate of Transjordan in 1921, quote, with the stroke of a pen one Sunday afternoon in Cairo. So with the stroke of a pen, Churchill took 77% of the land in which Jews could live and gave it away to an Arabian monarch who's not even from the Levant, but out of Arabia. And this is what I want to tell people. Listen up, guys. The two-state solution was implemented in 1921, 101 years ago. We've already established and implemented the two-state solution. It was ratified by the United Nations. It was officialized at the 1921 Cairo Conference when the British incorporated Article 25 into the Palestinian Mandate. And the two-state solution has already been implemented. The two states are Israel and Jordan. Israel is Jewish Western Palestine. Jordan is Muslim Eastern Palestine. And the two-state solution, Jordan got the bigger part. They got 77% of the territory. So the two-state solution has already been implemented. It's Israel and Jordan.
Okay, which brings up the things you've laid out before, is the similarity in the Palestinian and Jordanian flag.
Exactly.
Yes, sir.
If somebody want to check it out on the internet, it's the same flag, but Jordan has a star in the red triangle. Take away a star, and you got Palestine. Walid Shubat, who was a terrorist who got saved, I heard him once say in an interview, he said, all my life I was a Jordanian, and then one day I woke up and somebody took the star off my flag, and now I was a Palestinian.
Wow. That is incredible history, that just objectively true history that you're laying out to this point. We haven't even gotten to an opinion yet.
Yeah, so to reassure my readers that this is not just me, I have a quote from the PLO leader, Zuhair Mohsin, in 1977, and people can check that out. There's even newspaper snippets. He says this, the Palestinian people, this is a Palestinian leader of the PLO. He says this, the Palestinian people does not exist. In reality today, there is no difference between Jordanians, Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese. Only for political and tactical reasons do we speak today about the existence of a Palestinian people, since Arab national interests demand that we posit the existence of a distinct, quote, Palestinian people to oppose Zionism. For tactical reasons, Jordan cannot raise claims to Haifa and Jaffa, which are cities in Israel, while as a Palestinian, I can undoubtedly demand Haifa, Jaffa, Beersheba, and Jerusalem. However, the moment we reclaim our right to all of Palestine, we will not wait even a minute to unite Palestine and Jordan. This is PLO leader Zuhair Mohsen in 1977. So it's reason of optics. If you look at a map, if you zoom up, all the land that Arab Muslims possess versus what the Jews possess, millions of square kilometers from Afghanistan to Morocco belong to Muslims. You've got a little speck of a dust, a little speck of a country called Israel in the middle of that. And if you zoom out like that, then it looks like the Muslims are absolutely crushing the Jews. The Jews have almost no place to put their sole of the foot on. If you zoom in, as you have on the map, on just the modern state of Israel, then the modern state of Israel looks bigger comparatively to poor little Gaza and poor little West Bank. And now when you zoom in like that, you've got Israel that looks like it's the big bad boy and the big oppressor. And something else I'll say, and I'll hand it over to you for whatever you want to say next, Jameson, but whenever people talk about Gaza and the West Bank and how the Palestinian people, the Arabs, are oppressed there by Israel and how that's land that Israel wants to control that's not theirs, I simply ask people if they can tell me the history of how Gaza and the West Bank were created or formed. And nobody can even tell you the history. All that Gaza and the West Bank are the areas that the Egyptian and Jordanian military controlled at the cessation of hostilities after the 1948 war. That's what those things are. Pockets of control by the Arab armies intruding into Jewish area.
Incredible stuff. Thank you so much for bringing us to that point. Let's spend the rest of our time now, and you can take it, you can add in where you fill in where you need to, George. Let's spend the rest of our time now analyzing how some could be thinking, let's just say, Bible believers, dispensationalists, these people that are being mocked even by Orthodox Christians. I have Catholic friends question me. No, I'm not mad at anybody. What we could be thinking about the difference between the uppercase S state of Israel and then biblical Israel, and looking at the current timeline as well there, and ask some tough questions. We got George Antonos with us, YouTube channel Counsel and Might, the pastor at Hope Baptist Church in Montreal. We're gonna wrap this up now with the rest of the hour with asking these tough questions that are legitimate and seeing where one biblical worldview would stand on these things. Stay with us. It's the radio show that all the social justice warriors are warning you about. It's also the radio show that the big tech companies wish they could censor. It's a good fight with Jameson Haygood. We have George Antonios with us today by phone. He's the host of the YouTube channel Counsel and Might, pastor at Hope Baptist Church in Montreal. Visit them online, Hope Baptist Church Montreal, and on Facebook. Search it out. George, so let's get into the uppercase S state of Israel and then where biblical Israel is. And there's several different ways I'm just going to turn you loose on here. Let's start with the very foundation. There are Christians, born-again Christians, even Catholic friends, you name it, up and down the spectrum, the denominational spectrum, that are saying what was founded in 1948 was founded from a London central banking elite type, aristocracy type, Lord Balfour, Lord Rothschild, and that in itself cannot be prophetic if it was founded in that way. Can you start there?
Yeah. Am I on air now?
Yes, sir. You're ready to go.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, well, I tried, as many of you, to try to look at things. I try to see those patterns in the Bible.
Yeah.
That's really what I do. Okay. So is there a pattern, do I see in the Bible where you've got people in positions of influence who are Jewish, who may or may not be believers, that God is using to still further his plan for Israel? And the answer I find to that is yes, in my Bible. And he uses sometimes wicked heathen kings to do that.
Yeah.
One of the things I tell people, now you guys already know the context, so it's not going to have the same effect. But I talk to people about, imagine there's this Jewish criminal. I mean, a criminal. He's been in jail for attempted rape, and inexplicably, the government pulls him out of jail, and then he basically tells the government there's going to be an economic crash. Mm-hmm. Everything is going to crash, and he tells the government what to do with a view to that crash. And sure enough, even though the economy was doing great, as soon as this guy shows up, there's an economic crash, and that guy buys all the assets at like dirt cheap prices. Then he ends up basically canceling out private property completely. Everything in the land becomes the property of the government and of that guy, that Jewish criminal, who's inexplicably has so much control over the government. On top of that, he taxes the people at an unjust rate, but he spares the government elite from the taxes. So all the technocrats and bureaucrats, they don't get the taxes. They don't get taxed. Just the people do. And then after the economic crash, there's an economic recovery. And on the other side of the economic recovery, he doesn't cancel out the taxes, and all of a sudden the government owns everything. Mm-hmm. And what I just described to people is the story of Joseph.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Great.
Because you know your Bible. But even Christians who know their Bible, so we know Joseph to be Joseph. But try to look at it from the point of view of an Egyptian who sees that.
Yeah.
For all he knows, the Egyptian, that guy is wicked. Potiphar thinks he's wicked. Yeah. It's so bizarre. He comes out of jail and he ends up owning everything, and there's no more private property rights. And yet, the Bible presents that as a great salvation from famine and as a type of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. I see in my Bible constantly, inexplicably, Jewish men in positions of authority and undue influence out of all proportionality affecting foreign policy of Gentile nations, like Mordecai in Persia, like Nehemiah, like Daniel in Babylon, like Joseph. And it's not like those kings are righteous. I mean, the king of Cyrus is worshiping another god.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
And Artaxerxes.
Persian Empire is a persecutor of Israel.
Yeah, and Artaxerxes for Nehemiah and Cyrus for Ezra.
Correct. And, in the days of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar is a type of the Antichrist. I mean, he's burning people alive who don't worship his image. How much more wicked can you get than that? And yet the Lord calls him my servant. And Daniel has a lot of influence on Nebuchadnezzar. So just because there's some wicked people involved in the creation of the state of Israel, and I know there are, and just because some people seem to be able to trace the finger of Satan in the creation of the state of Israel, does not automatically negate that it is God using those unclean means to his own ends, just like he used ravens to feed Elijah. I mean, what country is not? The Bible tells us that Satan is the god of this world. Any country you point to, we can point to the United States of America.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will say the American Revolution was a Freemason work. And so therefore, apply this kind of reasoning to the United States of America, because it's easy to do to Israel, but when it comes to closer home, all of a sudden it's a little bit harder. There's a lot of Satanism in the founding of the United States of America. A lot. Washington, D.C. is laid out according to a Freemason grid. Does that mean that the United States of America as a state is an abomination in the sight of God? Of course not. Right. It just means that, just like Job, who was suffering, couldn't figure out is this Satan doing this to me, or is this God? David, when you read in Kings, in Kings it tells you, and Samuel, it tells you, 2 Samuel, that God moved David to number Israel.
Number the people.
When you get to Chronicles, you read that it's Satan that moved David. And so Christians either say it's Satan or they say it's God, when in reality the answer is it's both.
Interesting.
God using Satan.
Great stuff. I want to stay on time here so we can have more time in this final long segment. We'll have two more segments. This next one coming up is a long segment as we continue to now challenge with some of the legitimate questions that I've heard. And people know since that I have major issues and questions with how the uppercase S state of Israel is functioning, but rightly dividing biblical Israel and also the state of Israel and how also they may blend together is not a black or white issue either or. I think that's the major problem, is being forced into the dialectics of this is where we're getting this wrong. We have two more segments with George Antonos here. Now we're into the meat of it. biblical worldviews, current geopolitical states, and where this state of Israel and biblical Israel all come together. Send out the links, WYAB.com, and click listen. We're exercising every single one of our God-given rights right here in A Good Fight with Jameson Haygood. Have George Antonos here on the line. He's the pastor at Hope Baptist Church in Montreal. YouTube channel, Counsel and Might. George, now we're into the time of dividing as a Bible believer from our perspective, biblical Israel and the state of Israel that was founded in 1948. And let's start right here. I've had legitimate questions. I've studied this on my own. What about the people who are good, Christians of whatever faith? They believe the Bible. I should say whatever denomination, but they say, look, this 1948 deal and what's founded here at the state of Israel and all this Zionism, it has nothing to do with biblical Israel. How would you address that?
Well, I would ask them to name a difference, because I personally cannot see a single difference. And everything I see, including their unbelief, including their hard hearts and stiffened necks, are exactly in line with what I read in the scriptures. The Bible describes Israel as a wife that is temporarily put away. In Isaiah chapter 50, verse 1, the Lord says, for your transgressions, your mother is put away, that he's given her a bill of divorcement. Hosea says that they are temporarily not my people. I will not be your God. So really the issue is that's the view that Scripture presents. It's a wife that is put away temporarily. So if two people are looking at this wife and one says, well, that's not his wife, well, technically you're right in a way. She's not, because she's put away. But the person who looks at her and says, yeah, I know she's put away, but she is his wife, and he said he's going to take her back, and he still loves her once she repents of her unbelief, that person is right too. So if people point to satanic involvement in the creation of the state of Israel, I see that in my Bible. If people point to the fact that they're unbelieving, I see that in my Bible. So what exactly is it that the people see in there that differs from what they read in the Bible for them to be perceived as two entirely different things?
Okay, and right along with that would be, can you lay out, and I know this would be its own show, as we talk, when you say God's not done with Israel, we're familiar with things out of Romans 9 and 10 and 11 and other places. I'm just going to turn you loose on this, where Paul says things like, would not have you to be ignorant that blindness in part has come to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles come in. And you can quote your Bible way better than me. I paraphrase it. Lay out some of this. Lay out some of this, while we talk about, and to try to reiterate, even with my friends, and I mean I have good friends that hold to replacement theology and that Israel's done and all this stuff. Why would you say, like I say, that from the Bible that God's not done with Israel?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've got kind of like three overriding reasons to believe that's still the same Israel we read about. And the first one that I mentioned to my friends is, and that's a valid topic, and they're great questions,
sure,
and I appreciate we're having the conversation, is precisely this. I think you guys say the proof is in the pudding. The fact that those people are controversial, those people in the state of Israel right now, those Jews in the land, the fact that they are controversial is the ultimate indication to me that those are the Jewish people of the Bible.
I agree.
Because the Jewish people in the Bible are controversial. Isaiah 34, God talks about the controversy of Zion. Literally, that is the wording in the King James Bible, the controversy of Zion. And there is no more controversial topic in the world than Zionism.
You're right.
In Deuteronomy 20, I'm sorry?
I said you're right. You're right.
Yeah. In Deuteronomy 22:28, when the Lord warns them, he says, you guys are going to become, in unbelief, you will become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword. I don't know if you guys know this, but in Lebanon, in my country, when we see somebody who's unexpectedly happy, like suppose somebody's usually just kind of a downer kind of a guy, and he walks in the door and he's got a smile on his face, our customary salute question is, what happened? Did a Jew die?
Yeah. Wow.
That's what the Lebanese ask. That's the cause of joy, is that a Jew died. When we talk about here in the West, when we talk about somebody who's stingy, we call him a Jew. That's what a byword is, and a proverb.
Yeah.
A shaking of the head in Psalm 44. And that's repeated. So I see those people being extremely controversial, because I know some people say those are not ethnically the same Jews in the Bible. And my answer to that is, then why are we talking about them? Why are they so controversial? Why do emotions run so high on either side of the spectrum of the opinion concerning them, their identity? Why do emotions run so high? If that's not them, because the Jews of the Bible are controversial.
Yeah.
So the very fact that we're discussing them, to me, is an indication that we've got the right people here.
Yeah. Continue with why God
okay.
would, why from the Bible, why he would not be done with them.
Yeah. Okay. So the main reason, of course, is also the covenant. There's a covenantal reason, and that's that the covenant that God makes with Abraham is unconditional. That's always forgotten. A lot of people point to the Mosaic covenant. They say the Mosaic covenant is conditional. If they obey, then they are the people of God. God blesses them. But if they don't, they've broken the covenant. They've crucified their Christ, so that covenant is gone. What's forgotten, and Paul reminds us of this in the Epistle of Galatians, he says that the law, which was 430 years after the Abrahamic covenant, cannot disannul it. You can't disannul that unconditional contract that was made with Abraham. And God makes that covenant with Abraham in Genesis chapter 15 when Abraham is asleep, to indicate that Abraham has no part of this. It is completely independent and dissociated from the behavior of Abraham. This is entirely on the part of God. And the reasoning, the Jameson, that says that Israel has sinned, broken the covenant, and is no longer God's people, nor is the land theirs, that very reasoning is actually disapprovingly quoted by God in the prophet Jeremiah, 33:23, Jeremiah and 24. God tells him, "Considerest thou not what this people have spoken, saying, the two families which the Lord hath chosen, he hath even cast them off?" And in Isaiah 50, God also quotes the enemies of Israel in saying, "We offend not because they have sinned against the Lord." That is exactly the reasoning of Rome and Mecca, which has permeated the ranks of true Christianity. And yet, when I read my Bible, when you keep going, the Lord, in that context, when he quotes, he's saying, people are saying that they're not the people of God anymore because they have sinned. And then he goes on to say, just like I've made the ordinance of heaven and of day and night, that these ordinances cannot change, so will I not cast away the seed of Jacob and David my servant, no matter what. So you have an unconditional covenant that God has established with Abraham about his physical seed, and that covenant cannot be broken. And if God were ever to break that covenant because of the sin of Israel, then guess what? He would break his covenant with us when we sin also. I think God is good for his word no matter what Israel does. But they are under chastisement. And, and by the way, people point to the fact, they say, well, Israel is supposed to return to the land in faith and belief. That is not the case. Israel, I like to remind people, if we point to Israel, modern state of Israel, Jameson, as being, look, the Rothschilds were involved, evil international bankers, those guys don't believe in Jesus Christ. They're enemies of the gospel, which is true. Those things are true. I'm not whitewashing Israel. I'm very aware of their unbelief.
That's what I love about you.
Here, and they're very hard to witness to.
Yes, sir.
Okay? They're sadly, just like I'm defending Israel, I'm also willing to say, sadly, they are very proud and still a self-righteous people that rejects the gospel, sadly. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But I remind people this. I ask them this. When Israel conquered Canaan, did they do that in belief or unbelief? Because we point to the Israeli flag, and there's a star on it that they call the Star of David, whose origins they cannot explain, and we say this is a satanic symbol. Well, the prophet Amos and Stephen tell us that while they were in the wilderness, they had the star of their god Remphan. And while they had that star and worshiping it 40 years in the wilderness, they were still God's people. And God still leads them through the wilderness and gives them the land while they were in unbelief. They returned from the Babylonian captivity of Nebuchadnezzar in unbelief. And the Bible in Ezekiel 36, Ezekiel is formal about this. He says they returned first in unbelief. This is Ezekiel 36, verses 22 to 28. They return in unbelief, and they return in stages. And then God says, I'm going to bring you back, and I'm going to judge you in the land of Israel. And afterwards, I'll give you a new spirit and a new heart. So what I've been seeing happening in the 20th century is exactly that. Israel comes back in unbelief. God is regathering to the land so he can judge them, so they can repent and believe in Jesus Christ.
Which in real brief reference, we are saying is that 70th week of prophecy, that 70th group of 7 years that will come, which will make amends for the iniquity, make the end of sins, do all the things to bring this nation back to belief in the Lord Jesus Christ, ultimately, which will be at the end of that time, known as the time of Jacob's trouble, Daniel's 70th week of prophecy, or also sometimes referred to as the Great Tribulation. That's what that period of time will be for, and we are seeing it set up right in front of our face.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. And it's set up in unbelief. I mean, why else would Israel suffer tribulation were it not for their unbelief? So everything is perfectly in line. And when we talk about, conspiracies, there are conspiracies and there are evil people. And I talk about it sometimes on Council Night. But I also see a lot of anti-Zionist conspiracy in my Bible. Like the first conspiracy against Israel is the Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He says the people are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and come to pass that when there falls out any war, they join also onto our enemies and fight against us, and so they'll get them up out of the land. That was a false accusation. And I see Hitler accused that ethnic people who ends up in the land of Israel of exactly the same thing, that they're going to betray Germany, which is what Pharaoh was telling his people. These guys are going to betray Egypt. So these modern ethnic Jews are being accused by political leaders of sedition against their own country, just like Pharaoh was accusing the Jews in Egypt.
It's George it's George Antonios, man, brother. We're up against the time clock. I want to take the break here, so we have just enough time for you to sign off on the back end of this. And you're welcome here anytime. Can't thank you enough. One more little segment with George Antonios as we bid him Godspeed, and we will see him down the line again. I guarantee you. It's psychological inoculation from globalist propaganda, and you could get your daily dose right here in A Good Fight with Jameson Haygood. Final segment and sign off here with George Antonios, pastor over at Hope Baptist Church in Greater Montreal, right, George?
Yes, sir, up in Quebec, Canada.
I just looked you up and followed you on Facebook. Now you're in touch with me. And
cool.
Last few ways, a minute left. Once again, what are all the ways we can reach you and consume your content?
Yeah, so I get to pastor a great church by the grace of God, the Hope Baptist Church of Montreal on Facebook. You can reach me there. We have the Counsel and Might group also on Facebook. Counsel is written Counsel, not CIL, as in the spirit of counsel and might. YouTube, also Counsel and Might, Dr. George Antonios, GeorgeAntonios. And I also teach the Counsel and Might Seminary. We do that online. We've got students from around the world, from like Indonesia to the Western Canada, United States. That's by Zoom. So if you're interested in studying a Bible 3-year program, it's not an accredited course. I'm not interested in being accredited. We just teach the Bible. We do that on Zoom. And if you can't come in on the live Zoom meeting, then it's saved up on the cloud. You can watch it later on. So as a result, by the way, those Israel videos I put up on Counsel and Mike on YouTube, some of the scenes there apparently were a little graphic for YouTube. So they restricted the age on the videos, and they told me it doesn't affect the channel. And that almost choked my channel down to a trickle. So I had to delete a video on the Israel issue, and now it seems to be going better. But definitely, it seems YouTube is not too happy with the things I'm saying about Israel on YouTube. So it would be helpful to share that, just to put the word out. And I want to thank you, Jameson, for even allowing me the breadth of that discussion and coming on. I really appreciate it. It's very encouraging to talk about things that are dear to the heart of God and to hear different opinions. Hopefully, people can listen to what I said and check it in the scriptures.
You bet. Well, it's my honor and to collaborate with you. I've prayed for you before I even met you on the phone. You've been a major blessing to me in your ministry, and I do look forward to the friendship and the collaboration and the way we can support each other, even outside of prayer, in the future. I bid you Godspeed, sir.
Thank you. God bless you, and God bless your audience.
There you go. Until next time.